Ever get that feeling? Like a world's right on the edge of something massive, a turning point.
Yeah.
Like something's about to crack.
Oh, yeah, for sure. That tension, right.
Exactly. And what if there was actually like a prediction about a specific little time of trouble right before all the huge global stuff goes down?
Like a ramp up to the main event.
Yeah. It's not the end itself, but the part where everything starts really going haywire.
So that's what we're diving into today. We're going to unpack a specific chapter, really get into the nitty-gritty, from Ellen G. White's Last Day Events.
Last Day Events, heavy stuff.
You know it. Think of it like a roadmap, right? But this roadmap, it lays out all these events that lead up to this like truly global shift.
Okay, so just so we're crystal clear, this isn't about the ultimate end times, fire and brimstone scenario yet.
Nope, not yet. This little time of trouble thing, it's specifically talking about what happens before all those final plagues hit. It's a period of chaos, for sure, but it happens while Christ is still wrapping things up in the heavenly sanctuary, and the whole work of salvation is getting close to its end, right? And the interesting thing is, even though the focus initially seems to be on one specific nation, it totally branches out. It has these huge global implications.
Global, got it. So what's the spark? What lights the fuse on this little time of trouble?
Well, according to this chapter, it's the predicted end of religious liberty, especially in the U.S., and the conflict, the big showdown, it's all going to center around the Sabbath.
The Sabbath. You mean like Saturday, the traditional seventh day. Why would that become such a worldwide controversy?
The prediction is that there's going to be this huge push, super organized, to enforce Sunday, the first day of the week, as the holy day. It's going to be mandatory regardless of what people believe, their conscience. And this becomes the battle line where religious freedom, at least as some people have understood it, gets seriously curtailed.
So who are the big players in this scenario?
Okay, so the chapter gives us a rundown of who's doing what. It says the U.S. itself, the whole nation, is going to actually take steps to force people to keep Sunday holy. Laws, enforcement, the whole 9 yards. At the same time, Seventh-day Adventists are specifically named, and they're going to be pushing back hard, advocating for the seventh-day Sabbath because of their religious beliefs.
Makes sense, right? That's been their thing forever, theologically and all that. What about the rest of the world? What about other countries?
The text says that authorities, not just in America but everywhere, are going to rise up in their pride and power and make laws to restrict religious liberty.
Wow.
It's a worldwide trend, governments clamping down on freedom of conscience when it comes to religion.
So it's not looking good for religious freedom, huh?
Not according to this, no. Then there's this whole threefold union thing. That's a big one.
Threefold union. Okay, what's that about?
It's this future alliance, and it's a big deal. It says, the Protestants of the United States will be foremost in stretching their hands across the gulf to grasp the hand of spiritualism. They will reach over the abyss to clasp hands with the Roman power. So we've got U.S. Protestants, spiritualism, and the Roman Catholic Church.
A power trio.
Right. They're going to team up, and they're going to be the ones driving this whole suppression of individual conscience thing in America. And this is supposed to mirror, what the Roman power has done historically.
So it's not just the government on its own. It's like a collaboration with religious groups.
That's exactly it. The text says that these religious groups, the ones that have been ignoring certain warnings and teachings, they're going to side with the government. They'll join forces with the civil authorities to go after people who are sticking to what they believe are God's commandments, particularly the whole Sabbath thing.
Papists and Protestants united. It's kind of a shocker considering their history.
The text knows that. It says straight up, in this work, Papists and Protestants unite. Despite all their differences and past conflicts, they'll find common ground in opposing those who keep the seventh-day Sabbath.
Okay, so what about the legal system? How are courts supposed to handle all this during this little time of trouble?
Things get pretty messed up, legally speaking. The prediction is that judges won't even consider arguments based on God's law, especially the commandment about the Sabbath. They'll only care about human laws that say Sunday's the day to keep holy.
So much for justice.
It's like a total system failure. The courts favor those who follow human laws about the Sabbath, and those who keep the seventh day, well, they're out of luck.
And there's even advice in the text about how believers should act in court, right?
Yeah, it says to just give up our rights when you're dragged into court, unless it goes against God's direct commands. It's not about fighting for your legal rights. It's about upholding what they believe is God's right to our service and obedience to his law, even if you have to give up your legal defenses.
So the next part is about Adventists being treated with contempt. Why is that?
The text says it's Satan behind it all, pulling the strings. He's this masterful mind who wants to get rid of anyone who fears God and follows his law. It's not just random hate, it's a planned attack.
And it's not going to be subtle, is it?
Not at all. The prediction is that wealth, genius, education will combine to cover them with contempt. It's like this unified front where persecuting rulers, ministers, and church members will conspire against them. They'll use everything, talking, writing, bragging, threats, mockery, anything to break their faith and make them look bad.
Total social, religious, and political warfare.
Yeah, and it gets worse. Those who preach what they believe is Bible truth, they're going to be called traitors. And those who observe the Bible Sabbath, they're going to be called enemies of law and order. They'll be blamed for societal problems, you name it, even natural disasters.
Classic scapegoating.
Exactly. They take their conscientious objections, their deepest beliefs, and twist them to make them look bad. Like it's obstinacy, stubbornness, and contempt of authority. They'll even be accused of being disloyal to the government because they put their religious beliefs first.
So to stay faithful in that kind of environment, you'd need serious strength.
The text makes that point. It says, anyone who wants to serve God according to their conscience during this time needs courage, firmness, and a knowledge of God and his word. Because their motives will be questioned, their good intentions twisted, their reputations attacked.
All kinds of persecution is the next part. What does that even look like?
The text compares it to the persecution Protestants suffered from Roman Catholicism. It says that when Protestantism and the papacy team up, it'll be even worse. So imagine a huge increase in persecution, both in how widespread it is and how bad it gets.
Not a pretty picture. And it mentions secret tactics too, right?
Yeah, it talks about 1,000 masked batteries used against those who stay loyal to God's law. So imagine all these hidden attacks, subtle and obvious, trying to make them break their conscience.
It even talks about the spirit behind this persecution.
Right. It compares the spirit of those who reject God's law in the future to the spirit of those who rejected Jesus. It says they'll have the same spirit as had the men who insulted and betrayed Jesus. So it's a deep rejection of God's authority and no conscience about hurting those who follow him.
And the text gives some advice on how to prepare for this, right?
Yeah, it says to study the early church, especially what Paul and the apostles went through, like in the book of Acts. The idea is that God's people in the future will face similar trials, so learning how the early Christians survived can teach us a lot about faith, endurance, and trusting God.
The next part, every earthly support will be cut off. That sounds rough. What does that mean practically?
Basically, it's about economic warfare. The text says that all the wealth people have stored up will be worthless when the decree about the mark of the beast comes into play. Anyone who doesn't have the mark won't be able to buy or sell anything.
So it goes beyond just social isolation. It's a full-on economic blockade.
That's what it sounds like. There's going to be a time when we cannot sell at any price, and a decree forbidding anyone without the mark from buying or selling. It even mentions something that happened in California as a warning sign, a situation where economic pressure was used that foreshadows what's coming.
How would people even survive that?
The text is clear that in this final conflict, those who stay true to God and their conscience will have every earthly support cut off. If they refuse to put human laws about the Sabbath above what they believe is God's law, they won't be able to buy food or anything else.
So basically, they're trying to starve people into submission.
That's the idea. The text says that Satan believes that, for fear of wanting food and clothing, they will join with the world in transgressing God's law, and that will give him control over the earth.
The next section is, some are imprisoned for their faith. That's pretty straightforward.
It is. The prediction is that some will be imprisoned because they refuse to desecrate the Sabbath of the Lord. Some who stand up for the true Sabbath will be jailed, exiled, even treated like slaves.
I mean, it sounds crazy, right?
The text acknowledges that, but it says that as the restraining spirit of God shall be withdrawn from men and they shall be under the control of Satan, people will lose their moral compass. And these seemingly impossible things will happen. It's a picture of intense cruelty and injustice when God's influence is gone from people's hearts.
What advice is given to those facing imprisonment?
It encourages people to build a strong faith now, so that if they're called to suffer for their beliefs, even imprisonment, they'll be able to face it with trust in God's strength and provision.
Many will be put to death. That's an even heavier topic.
Yeah. This section talks about the possibility of martyrdom. It says that if you would have us be martyrs for the truth's sake, it may be the means of bringing many more into the truth. So their sacrifice could actually lead others to the truth.
It's like a wave of deadly persecution.
Many will be imprisoned, many will flee for their lives from cities and towns, and many will be martyrs for Christ's sake and standing in defense of the truth. There'll be a continued struggle at the risk of imprisonment, loss of property, and even of life itself to defend the law of God. It's non-stop conflict with huge personal risks.
And there's even a possibility of betrayal by loved ones.
Sadly, yes. It says that those loyal to God will be threatened, denounced, and outlawed, and even betrayed both by parents and brethren and kinsfolks and friends, even unto death. It's going to cause a lot of division and pressure.
But even with all this darkness, there's still hope, right?
Definitely. The text reassures us that believers won't have to face these trials on their own. It says they won't have the kind of courage martyrs had until they're actually in that situation. But when persecution comes, grace would be given to arouse every energy of the soul to show a true heroism. So God will provide the strength they need when they need it.
How does the chapter say to stand firm under persecution? What are the keys?
The main message is to rely completely on Christ. Let go of everything else and hold on to him. It warns that even close friends and family might turn on you because of the enemy's deception.
That's a lot of trust.
It is. The only way to stand strong during this time is to be rooted and grounded in Christ and to really embrace the truth about Jesus. The focus should be on Christ crucified, Christ our righteousness, because that's what feeds the soul and gives you faith, hope, and courage.
Even if you lose everything you have.
Yes. The text says that even if you lose all your possessions because of your faith, you can still have joy if you give your heart to Christ and rely on him completely as your substitute and surety. Your relationship with him is more important than anything you own.
The chapter then talks about how persecution scatters God's people. Is that always a bad thing?
It's definitely hard being forced to move and all that, but the text says it can serve a purpose. As opposition to the Sabbath grows in some areas, it might be necessary for believers to relocate to places where they're more welcome and can practice their faith more freely.
So it's not about just staying put and suffering.
No. The text says God does not require his children to remain where, by the course of wicked men, their influence is made of no effect and their lives endangered. In fact, it's a positive duty to go to places where the people are willing to hear the word of life and where the opportunities for preaching the word will be more favorable.
So there's strategy involved in the scattering.
Right, and the text says that those who have received an all-round education will have the advantage where they are when God's people are scattered around the world. So having a variety of skills, knowledge, and being able to adapt to different cultures will be super helpful.
Persecution leads to unity among God's people. How does that work?
When you have a common enemy and you're under pressure, petty differences don't seem so important anymore. The text says, the true sheep will hear the true shepherd's voice, so people will see more clearly who the real leaders are, and genuine believers will come together. Plus, a lot of people who drifted away from their faith will come back when things get tough.
Strength in numbers.
The people of God will draw together and present to the enemy a united front. Internal conflicts and power struggles will end because everyone recognizes the danger and the need to support each other.
The last part of the chapter is about how a crisis makes God's interference more marked, and how affliction purifies God's people.
Okay, so the text explains that throughout history, God has often intervened in big ways during crises to protect his people and mess up the plans of those who oppose him. When people ignore God's law and his followers are oppressed, God will answer their prayers for help. His power becomes more obvious during these tough times.
So even when things seem hopeless, there's a chance for God to step in.
Yeah. The text says that even though oppressors might seem to be winning for a while, it's only temporary. It's to make the final victory of God's people more marked, more glorious, more full and complete. It's about highlighting the contrast between evil's apparent success and God's ultimate power.
What about the reason for allowing God's people to go through such suffering?
The text stresses the importance of knowing God personally, especially with all the trouble coming. It also says that God loves his church so much that any suffering he allows is for their purification and ultimate good.
It's like a refining fire.
Exactly. Trials and hardships refine us, sanctify us, and fit us for the heavenly garner. They help us develop stronger faith, better character, and a greater ability to share our faith with others. Suffering is painful, but it has a purpose. It prepares us for heaven.
All right, let's recap what we learned about the little time of trouble from this chapter. We talked about how the Sabbath issue could lead to the end of religious liberty. especially in the U.S., which could then spread worldwide. This could create a powerful alliance against those who hold certain beliefs. We also looked at the possible contempt and accusations against believers, the different types of persecution that might face economic hardship, imprisonment, even martyrdom. And we talked about the importance of having an unshakable faith in Christ, the possibility of God's people being scattered, the unexpected unity that can come from persecution, the promise of God's intervention in times of crisis, and the idea that suffering can actually purify believers.
Yeah, that covers the main points and predictions. It definitely paints a pretty intense picture of what might be coming.
For sure. It makes you think, doesn't it? How strong is our faith? Are we truly ready to stand firm and trust God completely if we face challenges to our beliefs? It makes you really examine what you believe and where your loyalty lies.